Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. Today I'm here to give you my January wrap-up. So I read 7 books in the month of January, and one of them was an ebook. The rest were all physical copies. I had 3 3-star reads, 3 4-star reads, and 1 5-star read. The first book I read in the month of January, starting off the year strong, was a historical fiction by Matthew Harvey called The Wolf of Wessex. This is a book where it's kind of a murder mystery set in the very early British Isles history. The Vikings have not invaded yet. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of like small kingdoms all at war with each other. And this book follows the story of Dunstan the Bold, who is now an older man and he just wants to live out the rest of his days in peace. But that comes to an abrupt halt when he is privy to a horrendous murder that happens near the cabin where he lives. He then finds himself in charge of a young girl named Edwin, who kind of becomes his charge as the two of them go off on the road to discover who the killer is and why they are committing these murders. This is a really good book. This was my first read by Matthew Harvey, and I wanted to start out the year with a really solid kind of historical fiction vibe, because I do want to read more historical fiction this year, and this was a good place to start. I highly recommend this book. It is a standalone. If you haven't read anything by Matthew Harvey before and you're kind of looking to get a taste of what his writing style is like, it's a great mix between murder mystery and historical fiction, and I just really appreciated it a lot. I also was able to interview Matthew Harvey on the channel. I will put the interview we had up in the cards so you can go watch that. Super interesting guy, and I was very excited to pick up another book of his after we were done talking to start another one of his series, hopefully this year. Then we went over to my in-laws for an extended Christmas, and I got through some books while I was there, which was very exciting. The first one I picked up was Seasons of Albedone by Ilan March and Christopher Warman. I know that I'm not pronouncing this name correctly, and I am so sorry in advance for that, but this book was excellent. This is a book that is divided into 4 parts, each one kind of represented by one of the 4 seasons. It gives me Grimm's fairy tales meets a little bit of Miyazaki. There's wholesome, and at the same time there's grimdark in places. It's a really interesting blend. This book to me is such a great twist on the fairy tale sort of trope, and I absolutely loved it. The first 2 stories in this book were my favorite. They really took me off guard. I could not put this book down. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to give it away, and as you can see, it's a very short read. So I highly encourage any of you, if you are looking for a short, very dark fairy tale style read that has equal parts dark and wholesome, go ahead and pick this up. I will be interviewing the authors of this book on February 17th on my channel, so definitely stay tuned for that. I'm very excited to get a chance to chat with them about it. Yeah, this was a pleasant surprise. I anticipated liking it, but I did not anticipate how much I was going to enjoy this book. The next book that I read and finished while I was at Christmas with my in-laws was Chasing Graves by Ben Galley. This is a story that follows the POVs of multiple characters. We start out with Caltro Basalt, who is a character who is a locksmith, and he's been called to this city by someone who has a job for him to break into a vault. Now, he gets there and things do not go as he planned, and that is saying it lightly. This is a very grimdark, kind of ancient Egypt-inspired necropolis city. Basically what happens is there are a whole bunch of people who are soul stealers, and what that means is when someone dies, their soul does not immediately go to the afterlife in this story. It is kind of up for grabs for a certain amount of time, and people have perfected the art of binding those souls into servitude. So basically this entire major city is built on the servitude of these bound souls. The concept of this was just super fascinating. I really liked it a lot. Now, I did give this one a 3 stars just because I felt like the execution of that concept didn't land the way that I wanted it to, and sometimes I felt like the different POVs were starting to kind of drag out a little bit. Each one of those characters is incredibly isolated within their storyline. And I think I was having a hard time with that because I wasn't getting enough interaction with other characters that had any weight to the main POVs. I enjoyed the read, definitely glad that I read it, but it definitely didn't land the way I was hoping it was going to. That being said, I am really looking forward to jumping in and reading another one of Ben Galli's series because he has several and I know a lot of them are incredibly well loved, so I'm definitely going to be jumping into one of those in the future. The next thing that I read in January was The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. This was my 5-star read of the month. I buddy read this with Matt on Books, and then the two of us had a chat with Dr. Philip Chase because Philip teaches the main title story of this book in his Intro to Fiction class at the college that he teaches at. And that was an incredible conversation. I will link that up in the cards as well. If you guys have any interest, go check that out. We had an amazing chat about this book. There's so much here. Like, this is not a big book, but there is so much here. As you can see, I spent a lot of time tabbing while I was reading this book. This is probably one of my more annotated reads up to date. This book is the story of a Vietnam soldier and his squad. It is part historical fiction, part memoir. The way that this book is written just is brilliant for the story that it's trying to tell, and the way that it weaves in the dark, heavy themes that exist within war and PTSD and men and women who come home from the war and the things that they have to go through and deal with, trying to assimilate themselves back into some kind of normal. I really don't have great words to describe my experience with this book other than it is an incredibly good read, and I have the opinion that anyone who is writing about war and about soldiers and about people with PTSD should read this book because it's one of the best representations of what PTSD is actually like, and that's just one small part of all of the incredible themes that are woven into this book. 5 stars, I can't imagine giving it anything less, and I'm so glad that I was able to have this chat with Matt and Philip about it after I read it because that just kind of added to the experience of reading it in the first place. Next up, I finally finished a book that I have been working on since December, and that is Assassin of Grins and Secrets by K.E. Andrews. Now, it is not the fault of the book by any means that it took me this long to read it. I really wanted to slow down with this book because it was evident very quickly that K.E. Andrews is a very poetic writer. She uses a lot of very beautiful, colorful, vibrant descriptions with her world building, with her characters, and I really wanted to give the book the attention that it deserved in that respect. So I really focused on slowing down with this book, really taking in all of the sights and sounds that she was giving me in the descriptions, and that really added to the experience of this book. This story is about the grinning assassin, Serene, who is one of the 3 main POVs in the book. She is near death in a prison, kind of suffering from internal and external wounds from her past life as an assassin when she is scooped up by Prince Ramesses. Prince Ramesses is a young, idealistic character who needs the grinning assassin's help to discover some of the plots and nefarious activities that he believes are going on back home at the palace. I went into this expecting kind of the typical female assassin jumping over rooftops and murdering people at midnight kind of vibes. But that's not what this story is, and I actually really appreciated that. It's a fresh twist, in my opinion, on the female assassin trope. Serene, a lot of Serene's assassinations and all of that kind of stuff take place prior to the book starting. There's still a ton of action. There's a lot of really awesome, intense sequences in the book. But it was kind of fun to read a different take on that trope. I'm going to talk more about this book in my dedicated review of it, which should have come out right before this video. I will link it up in the cards below so you can go watch that. But overall, really had a great time with this book and looking forward to seeing what K.E. Andrews puts out in the future. All right, the next book that I finished in January was The Hoosier Schoolmaster by Edward Eggleston. This was a swerve away from all of the other things I've been reading this month, and this was for my in real life quote-unquote book club with my husband and 2 friends of ours back from college, and this was my husband's pick, and he really enjoys reading classic books. I had absolutely no idea what to expect from this book. Every time I have to. This book is about a young man who is a schoolmaster, and he goes into this backwoods area where things are done a certain way and people are not necessarily uneducated, but it's definitely a rough crowd. And so he goes there and he's going to take over this school, and it's one of those stories where all of these other schoolmasters have been run out. Everyone kind of expects that he's going to be the same story. The kids are going to be too much for him. They're going to run him out of town. And they're kind of secretly proud of that fact. Things get a little bit more intense because there's a robbery that happens in the town, and fingers are flying all over the place, throwing blame in every direction. And our young schoolmaster gets caught up in the intrigue of all of it. And a lot of this book is very interesting because it's written in dialect, so all of the characters from this kind of backwoods area are actually written in dialect, which was super interesting and really added to the atmosphere of the story. I liked this book. It was fine. What was jarring for me, and this was a third-person omniscient story that didn't really work for me as well, simply because it was so jarring. There was a lot of times where I was having a really hard time jumping with the storyline to figure out what was going on, and I kind of felt like some of the character storylines were a little weak overall. So yeah, it was good. I gave it 3 stars. I'm glad I read it, but overall I don't see this being a book that I would probably read again. Alright, the last book that I finished in January was my ebook read, and that is Panacea by Alex Robbins. This drew me in because of the cover. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a massive Minotaurs fan when it comes to fantasy creatures, and I was so excited when I saw this cover because I have been waiting to read something in fantasy that has Minotaurs in it, and this one was just too good to pass up. The first half of this book was absolute gold for me. I loved it. It had a father and son multi-POV contrast, which I really enjoyed. It takes place in an ancient Greek-inspired fantasy world where these different cities are training up their armies, and they have young men in training. They have the older commanders who are kind of overseeing the protection of everyone. And then we find out that there is a massive herd of Tauros that are coming towards the city, and they have to make this last-ditch effort to try and stop these creatures from overrunning their cities. The first half was great. I really enjoyed it. I was really excited. There was a massive, intense moment that happens about halfway through the story that just blew my mind. It was incredibly well written. It was so intense. I loved it. I was here for it. We were in the dirt, in the blood, in the battle. I was so in love with it. The book kind of took a very different turn than I was anticipating after that event. And I'm not going to say too much for anybody who has not read it yet, because I don't want to spoil anything, but it really took a turn from where I was anticipating it was going to go. And I really struggled with what I felt like were a pretty massive, shift of characterization. I'm fine with character motives changing in a story, but it has to make sense, and it has to feel true to the character that has been built up to the point that I've read. I still think that this book is 100% worth a read. I think that the battle sequences in this are brilliantly written. Really enjoyed also the presence of the Minotaurs as the threat in this story. But yeah, so that was the last book that I finished in January. Also in the month of January, I got through the first chunk for our Shogun read-along that I am hosting with Alex from Tall Guy Reads, Joanna, Alan from the Library of Alexandria, and we are having a great time with this book. It's so good, you guys. It's historical fiction about a English seafaring captain pilot who is washed up on the shores of feudal Japan, and it's So good. It's so good. We read books 1 and 2 in the read along this month, and then we had a chat about it, which I will link again up in the cards. If you are interested in jumping on with us, honestly, we are still close enough to the beginning that you could catch up pretty easily if you wanted to. Highly recommend this book. If you are in any way, shape, or form interested in historical fiction and just Asian history in general, this is so good, you guys. I'm loving it. Really looking forward to our book 3 discussion that will happen at the end of February. So I also got through that, which was basically a whole nother book in itself. There were some really great live streams this month. We had Imposter Syndrome episode 2 with the Writing Women in Fantasy focus, and we had some amazing author ladies that joined me for that. We had Crystal Matar, Shauna Lawless, and Quenby Olson on that episode, and we had a great discussion. Really loved it. It's been kind of crazy, I'm not gonna lie. It's been a little crazy, and my goal of stepping back a little bit didn't go exactly as I planned. I felt like January was actually more hectic than December. So now that we're getting into February and March, we'll see if I can, now that I've kind of smoothed over that first month of the year, we'll see if I can kind of take a step back and work some more on my book, which I have passed the 50,000 word mark on my book, which I'm very excited about. That's a huge milestone, and I'm very proud of myself for getting to this point. Writing a book in the midst of all of this and having a family and a life outside of BookTube and reading and writing is a major feat, and I'm really proud of myself. So I'm going to keep chugging away at that, and I am bound and determined to have Bloodstones out in 2023 towards the end. Very excited to share that with all of you guys. I cannot wait, honestly. I also opened my Patreon this month, which was awesome, and I'm so grateful to all of my incredible new patrons who joined in the first month that it was open. You guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate your support for me and the channel and my writing. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you so much. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon, I have 3 different tiers. They're all linked down in the Patreon is linked down in the description box below, so feel free to check that out. I have an exclusive Discord, giveaways, content behind the scenes writing kind of stuff, so definitely go check those out. And yeah, I think that's everything for me for January. It was a great month of reading. I'm really excited to dig into February and see how much I can get done. Let me know down in the comments what you guys' favorite read of January was. How did you start out the month? What book did you start with? What was your first read of 2023? How did it go? Was it 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars? You don't want to talk about it? Let me know down in the comments. I hope you guys are having a fabulous week, enjoying your first February days. I hope you are all reading 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.